First of all, the latest update is that Russia has detained 9 people in Tajikistan. That is the latest. They did detain 4 people last week. You probably saw those images circulating online. They detained those 4 in the Bryansk Oblast, which is in Russia, south of Moscow, headed towards Ukraine, headed towards Kiev. So that was one more point of possibly Ukraine had something to do with this. But as of today, 9 have been detained in Tajikistan. This was done by the Tajikistan authorities as well as in cooperation with the Russian security forces. They were looking for these 9 people. So they've been detained. That is far from Ukraine. It's unclear, once they find out from these people who they may have ties with. The investigation will continue. ISIS has continued, they've claimed responsibility for the attack, and they continue to claim responsibility for the attack. We're going to go over what they claim. Russia says, yeah, okay, maybe these Islamic terrorists did the attack itself, but somebody paid them and somebody gave them the ability and the information in order to get this done. And they're pointing the finger at Ukraine and possibly even the West. Some people have asked, is this going to lead to war? Is this an escalation and Putin's going to now strike NATO countries? Putin has now scoffed at that idea and said no. But he did say that that Ukrainian F-16s being housed on NATO ally bases are legitimate targets. But he says he's not going to be attacking any NATO countries. Okay, so let's go through some of these details a little bit. So first of all, ISIS-K has taken responsibility, and they continue to, and they've released this new statement saying, by blaming Western countries for the terrorist attack, Russia recognizes its failure in the face of the Islamic State. After its resounding defeat, Russia found no choice but to direct accusations of collusion against its opponents in the Western camp to evade admitting its major failure in the face of the Mujahideen. So they're still saying, it was us, and you guys are trying to deflect because you failed, and so you're deflecting. Now, is it possible that ISIS did this with no Ukrainian help and Russia's just pointing the blame at Ukraine? Sure, that's of course possible. This is like the Nord Stream pipeline. We're not going to really know ever. We're going to have to just kind of keep, pieces will come together through time, and through time things will start to add up and make a bit more sense. But sure, look, Russia has a big, there's a benefit to Russia blaming this on Ukraine, right? That can't be ignored, no matter if you feel like Ukraine was behind this or not. You can't ignore, as we go through the facts and try to figure out who done it, we can't ignore a glaring fact, which is it would be in Russia's benefit. This attack happened. It would be in Russia's benefit if they could blame it on Ukraine, because this would help rally up support for the war. This could lead towards a greater offensive in the war, getting the public support, right? So all of that would be beneficial to Russia if they just said, all right, maybe ISIS did it, but we're just going to blame Ukraine because we have something to benefit from that. For sure, they do. What's also interesting, though, about ISIS-K is that this is the group that supposedly carried out the Kerman bombings in Iran just in January that killed 103 people at the commemorating services of Qasem Soleimani. There was an attack there. That was supposedly ISIS-K. What's interesting, though, is that ISIS-K is a very small organization. They just barely gained any steam. Where it gets suspicious is because then people would say, well, why would the United States, if let's say Ukraine is behind this and CIA is all over Ukraine, so the CIA would know if these terrorists are hiding out in Ukraine and plotting things. That leads us to 2 things. First of all, in both of the bombing situations, the Iranian bomb and now the Russian bombing, the U.S. warned both countries in advance that there was a potential attack happening. Now, the U.S. says, well, that's because we have this policy of like duty to warn. We have a duty to warn policy where, even if you're our enemy, like Russia and Iran, we still want to warn you if there's going to be an imminent attack in your country. But isn't it odd that there was an imminent attack in Iran and an imminent attack that these attacks happened in Iran and Russia of all places? And ISIS-K being a very small offshoot of ISIS core. How would they get the resources, the power, the ability, the intel, the infrastructure to carry out these mass killings in which just happens to be two of our enemies? Odd. And not only do they go after those two enemies, they actually go after a third. Where ISIS-K originated is Afghanistan. And guess who they fight in Afghanistan? The Taliban. So the U.S. has a unfortunate history of the enemy of my enemy is my friend. And so is it possible that the U.S. has somehow worked in, I don't know if it would be collusion or if it would be turning a blind eye or just somehow helping in some way, whether it be through not stopping or whether it be through actually helping? Is it possible that the U.S. has been following that age-old disastrous strategy of the enemy of my enemy is my friend and saying, hey, we don't like ISIS-K, but as long as they're not attacking us, we're cool. Now they're attacking the Taliban, which that's our enemy. We don't like the Taliban. They won the war in Afghanistan. What a shame. They go after Iran, and now they go after Russia. Of all places, ISIS-K. And somehow avoiding all of these other nations, all of these other Western nations who also would be against would be reason for ISIS-K to want to attack, since ISIS has a, caliphate mentality of wanting to establish a religious caliphate and believes that everybody else are, infidels, and including, that would be not just the enemies, but also allies would be considered infidels. We would be considered infidels. So why are they not able to attack us, but they're able to attack Russia, Iran, and Taliban? That leads us to suspicion, right? There's some suspicion there because if you can name, it was ISIS-K, and you say that they did it within 1 hour after giving these kind of, who knows what kind of warnings the U.S. actually gave Iran and gave Russia, if they were just like half-assed warnings, and then suddenly they do attack and they just happen. So, the line of pointing the finger at the U.S. and the CIA and Ukraine is not far-fetched when you start looking at the reality of who ISIS-K is, who they've attacked, how they would even have the ability to do that, since this is a very, very small offshoot of ISIS core. ISIS core doesn't even seem to be able to stage these kinds of attacks. So how could ISIS-K? So, there's a legitimate, I think, line of thinking to say this is suspicious and not quite adding up. Russia's also claiming that they're investigating links to crypto funds that they say came from Ukraine to this organization. And maybe Iran needs to start looking at that as well, at some sort of links to the West for the bombing that happened, the Kerman bombings that killed 103 people. So if we look at the possibilities, it's possible ISIS did it, and it's possible that Russia wants to blame Ukraine to ramp up their war and gain support, right? That's possible. ISIS, it's possible they didn't do it, but they like the idea that they did it, and so they claim it, because why not? If the West is going to let them claim it, and that would be maybe part of the collusion, like, look, we're going to help you with this, or we're going to do it, but you just take the responsibility, and in exchange, we'll give you some money, or we'll stay out of your way, or who knows what the exchange there is. We know that our government has certainly allied itself with people who ended up becoming terrorists, radicals. So it's possible. It's possible that we just partner with them straight up, or Ukraine did, saying like the enemy of my enemy is my friend. So it's less believable in looking at the size of ISIS-K, in looking at their infrastructure, their newness. It's hard to imagine that they've been able to pull off these two attacks in Iran and in Moscow without some sort of help, some sort of plan. But it's also possible that they just did it. Let's just say they did it. It was ISIS. It was ISIS-K. They did it. Moscow doesn't want to believe it because maybe many people, including the West, don't really, the West is obviously believing it, but it would be hard to believe that this organization that was small and kind of wimpy suddenly isn't, and actually has more power and ability than previously thought. So let's say ISIS did it. Either way, Russia wins the narrative on this one, because you've got two tracks, right? either Ukraine and the CIA did this attack somehow. Either they did it straight up and they told ISIS take the credit, or they helped ISIS do it. Either way, right? If the U.S. is behind it, if Ukraine and the U.S. are behind this, then Russia wins the narrative on that, saying like, look, you guys claim you're the good guys, but you're not the good guys. You're attacking civilians. So you're not good guys. And this is totally against the rules of war. This concert was not a legitimate target, not a legitimate military target. You guys keep screaming about, oh, it must be legitimate military targets and you're killing civilians, and yet here you are. So if that happened, if it's true that Ukraine was somehow behind this, or the U.S. or CIA was somehow behind this, then Russia wins that narrative. If it's ISIS that truly was behind this and Russia's just wrong and it really was just ISIS, again, Russia wins the narrative on. I mean, look, there's no winning in this because it's absolutely tragic. So I want to make that clear. 144 people were gruesomely killed. It was horrible, absolutely horrific. But as far as narratives go, if ISIS was truly behind this, then I think the West needs to have a conversation with itself a bit, people in the West, and start asking the question of why is Russia exactly our enemy again? Here's Russia that was with us in World War I. Here's Russia that was with us in World War II. And here's Russia that's been with us on the war on terror, fighting terrorists, fighting ISIS. So ISIS is an enemy of Russia because Russia's been fighting ISIS in Syria. So why is Russia exactly the big bad demon that we're supposed to always be against when they've been with us, allied in all of our major conflicts? I mean, now with Syria, of course, they were for Bashar al-Assad and we were against Bashar al-Assad, but we kept saying things like, oh, but we're there to fight terrorism. That's why we're in the Middle East, right? Because it's the war on terror. It's not because we're fighting Bashar al-Assad. At least it's not supposed to be. So then Russia's been fighting terrorists. They have an absolute reason, existential reason to fight these types of terrorisms. I mean, these countries are right on their border. So they, of course, have been fighting terrorists. So either way, Russia starts to, when you come out of this, there's obviously a lot of sympathy for the attack that happened. Either way, they win the narrative. The only way they don't is if they did it as a false flag. If Russia did it as a false flag to their own people and they're blaming it on Ukraine so they can ramp up the war, that's the only way this makes Russia look really, really bad. But did Iran do that to themselves too? Is the Taliban also fighting, these, are they just making it up? Who is behind ISIS-K that's let them get to the point where they're able to pull off these types of attacks? Are they really the ones pulling off these attacks? Those are good questions to be asking, and people are asking those questions. So we're going to continue watching this story and seeing as we get updates and following along to kind of connect those dots and continue, slaying the narratives that keep just circulating around. That's what we're going to try to do here.